Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
You said in our last podcast, when we were talking about the conversion of St. Paul, you were talking about forgiveness. We talked about salvation. At some point in that podcast, you mentioned to me forgiveness. That's the topic for another day. Well, today is that day. So I don't really have a question. I think I basically understand meaning of the word forgiveness. You get past being angry and get on with it, and you forgive.
Yeah, one of the things, though, the reason why I mentioned that, don't forget, Paul realized what he had been doing. Then to realize that the Lord offers him salvation for free. Well, it's got to be mind-boggling. I'm not worthy of this forgiveness. I have no right to this forgiveness. The human race has no right to this forgiveness, and that now we're offered salvation for free. So I think maybe that's what prompted my question. When it's related, when we're speaking about forgiveness in relationship to someone who is mourning, I think what might go through a person's mind is his or her interaction with the deceased while he was alive, and trying to realize maybe I shouldn't have done this, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And it's a matter of being able to forgive yourself. Unless you're able to forgive yourself, you're never going to lead a peaceful life. It's always going to be within you. And so forgiveness of the individual is just as important as forgiveness of another person.
I'm going to stop you for a second and just tell you that a few weeks back while you were here, you got a couple of phone calls, and I overheard one of the messages, and it was from a mother who had lost her son, 24, to cancer. And she needed to talk to you because she was having a myriad of feelings, probably some anger, some deep sorrow, and I don't know why I was compelled to get your reaction to it as we stood in the kitchen, and you said to me, "What would you tell her?" And I was like, I was back on my heels. I started thinking about the topic of forgiveness in terms of a funeral. So is that what you're talking about in terms of mentoring or counseling somebody when they just can't get past the passing of a loved one? That they have to find some or generate some forgiveness to maybe continue the healing process.
Definitely that's involved, but I think, too, they have to embrace what's happening. In other words, the reality of the situation is the individual has died. And the better we realize that, the easier it's going to be for us. What happens is, and I mentioned it gets worse before it gets better, only because in the beginning, when a person is mourning because someone just died, whether it be a day ago, a week ago, even a month ago, there's a lot of support from the people around us. Lots of support. As a matter of fact, when a person says, "Where is God when I need God? I need him now, but he's not here. He's nowhere to be found." Well, look at all of these people that are bringing casseroles, that are having words of sympathy, that are making an effort to be with the individual day and night, if you want, to try to support that individual. God works through human beings. He doesn't often do miracles as we think of miracles. The miracle is that he's able to work through the human beings. So once the people begin to realize that, wow, these people are here because they are responding to God's love and they're passing it on to me. Now, once they begin to realize that, the pain eases, I think. So, in the beginning, the first couple of months, the people are surrounded by all of this. And the reason why I says it gets more difficult is because there reaches a point when, well, it's over with. Okay, now we go on with life, and so
Obladi, oblada.
Yeah,
life goes on.
Exactly, but the individual is still hurting, and there's no support now. I mean, I'm exaggerating to an extent just to bring the point across. I mean, all those people that were bringing casseroles, they're all gone. It's over with. And so now I'm alone, and the one I love is, whether it be a husband, whether it be a son, whether it be a wife, well, that one I love is dead, and I'm alone. And there's nobody here. So now is a good time to say, God, where are you? But because I hate to use this, but time heals all wounds, after 2 months, it does ease off on its own. We were made that way. Thank God we were made that way. Imagine if we would have to carry that anger with us for months and months and years, which there are some people that do.
Is there an application in terms of forgiveness to what we just discussed
That does happen also, yes.
in that application?
It does happen. I know that in talking with people that are going through that or have gone through that, they begin to realize that, you know what? God was there. God was walking alongside of me. You know that poem about the footprints in the sand, you
Sure.
know. God was there. I just didn't recognize that Jesus was there. And so I'm sorry for the way I acted. I'm sorry for, whatever else happened. Huh? So that forgiveness that we're talking about now, maybe it's a little bit too specific. What I wanted to refer to is forgiveness in general.
Somebody strays and has a relationship outside of their marriage. The partner asks for forgiveness. What do you do in that situation? What would you recommend?
Okay. I've always said that where there is a marriage, one of the most important virtues has got to be forgiveness. Forgiveness has to be part of that marriage, not just for that reason that you just mentioned, but even for things that are nonsensical, we might think so. We have to be able to forgive each other. I mean, because things are going to happen that are not to my liking, no matter how much you love each other. And so you have to be able to forgive that individual. Otherwise, the marriage disappears in a moment, and it shouldn't be. So forgiveness is a very important part of marriage. Now, what happens, though, as far as a person who strays, there are people that right at their deathbed want to go to confession. And that's because they've held on to that all of their lives. And they want to confess that they did stray. Then they need that forgiveness from God. Because they were never able to get it from their partner because they didn't want their partner to know. And so they lived with that guilt all of that time. And the relief that they sense when they're forgiven, even at their deathbed, is enormous. So after they realize that they've been forgiven by God, they have to be able to forgive themselves. See, now, sometimes when people go to confession, they're absolved from their sins. And people walk away saying, well, how could it be so easy for me to go to confession and my sins are forgiven? It's got to be more difficult than that. He's got to give me a more serious penance. What's this penance about? Try to do something nice for somebody else, this type of thing, or whatever it is that they get as a penance. But I think one of the things is they don't realize that God does work through simple things. Look at the bread and wine. If we believe that that's body and blood of Christ, that's the most simple means of his coming to us. He's using the most ordinary food to come to us. And he's most vulnerable. You can do what you want with that bread and wine, really. It's a vulnerable situation that he's in, that God is in when he comes to us. So I guess what I'm saying is he has told us through Jesus that forgiveness comes from God. We have to accept that that forgiveness is there, and we can't second guess it. Some people, as I say, don't believe that they're fully forgiven because how could it be so simple? Well, do you doubt the power of God? That's what you're doing when you say, I can't be forgiven that way. If God says you're forgiven, you're forgiven. Now, unless you're playing games with that whole sacrament, I mean, the reality is He's made it easy for us to seek that forgiveness. I think that's one of the things we have to accept. And the other thing, too, is the individual who has hurt us also has to be able to accept that forgiveness, or else there's something wrong.
Forgiveness can be applied to a lot of different areas of life in general. Get outside the house and you take a work situation. You may say something truly mean-spirited or offensive to a coworker. You get in the car at the end of the day and you say, I shouldn't have done that. There was a much better way of handling that. How would you recommend somebody handle that situation? And how quickly?
The next day, when you see that person again, you know what, I was a fool. I'm sorry I did what I did. Simple as that. And usually that is accepted most graciously, unless there's some other angry aspect to that person's life. But when you do that, I mean, that's, first of all, you're humbling yourself by saying that. And the person receiving that, it's an apology, it's an acknowledgement that you did something against that individual. I think it's a very beautiful thing to accept. It's a humbling thing, but beautiful at the same time.
You often see people in various courtroom situations. Let's go there for a second. I'm always fascinated by the people who have been on the receiving end of a horrible crime. Yet they manage to say, first and foremost, realize that I forgive you. I find that incredibly powerful, and I would think in certain cases impossible to forgive someone who maliciously took a life. Yet people seem to rely on faith so heavily that the first thing they do is forgive the person. That's beautiful, isn't it?
I think you've said it beautifully. What happens there is that it's very hard to have peace unless you're able to forgive. I don't want to mix forgiveness and justice. The punishment has to be there for whatever that individual did. Forgiveness is a whole different level. Mm-hmm. You can still forgive someone who's going to spend the rest of his life in jail. But it comes from being able to free yourself of this hurt. When you forgive somebody, that's what happens. You free yourself of any hurt, basically.
Final thoughts on forgiveness? You either forgive or you don't forgive. It's not like an element of your life that you can build on. You can't build on your own ability to forgive, can you?
Yeah, but if you don't forgive, your personality might become distorted.
What if it's not part of your instinct to forgive? What if you're just
that could be too.
What if you're just an angry human?
Well, I say avoid that person.
Well, neither one of us appear to be angry. I find that if you have a good sense of humor and a great outlook on life, no matter what the case may be, you will never have a difficult time saying I'm sorry to anyone in any situation.
Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive others. Wow. That's where this impetus to forgive that the Lord gives us is very, very serious. When you think about it, what he's saying is, you see the way I forgive you? Then you have to forgive others the same way. And let's face it, many people can't do that. They don't know how to forgive somebody. And they live with that in their minds and so on and so forth. But that last phrase of the Our Father is very, very challenging, because it says, unless I can forgive others, then I don't expect forgiveness from God. So I think, it's something that we have to take seriously. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.